Our topic for this lecture is communication apprehension. Maybe it's a new term for you, but I believe that it is very important, especially when we take into consideration the fact that much of the language knowledge is seen through speaking and communication. The definition of communication apprehension is related to the fear of communicating. Or, as it says here, it is the individual difference in the willingness to communicate. So based on this difference in the willingness to communicate, we differentiate between low apprehensive individuals, which are the individuals that like communicating, and high apprehensive individuals, people who dislike and fear communicating. The types of communication apprehension are determined based on three distinctions. The first one is related to the nature of communication, and based on the nature of communication, there is a state or transitory communication apprehension and dispositional communication apprehension. The first type of communication apprehension, as it can be seen by its name, transitory, means that it is temporary, and we have all felt such kind of communication apprehension before some important public speaking or presentation, and certain certain level of communication apprehension is even good for these situations, because it forces you to be more attentive. The second distinction based on the nature of communication apprehension is dispositional, which means that it is almost innate. It is we are born like that, and it is the general feeling of nervousness when we communicate. Then the second distinction of communication apprehension is related to the communication media, and maybe it will sound strange, but there is written communication apprehension, although it is not very frequent. And basically, communication apprehension is a synonym of oral apprehension. The third distinction is related to the context, and based on the context, we differentiate between public communication apprehension, which relates to any forms of formal speaking, giving public speeches in front of big audiences, maybe defending your thesis. That's a kind of public speaking. Then the second one is related to meetings, for example, departmental gatherings, or if you work in schools, they are called collegiums, something like that. Then group communication apprehension, which is not so high in small discussion activities, and the least apprehensive people are in a dyadic context, which is one-to-one conversation. So based on this, the two higher types of communication apprehension refer to public formal speaking and meeting, but we are less apprehensive when we are in small groups, or when we communicate in one-to-one conversations. Why is it important to study communication apprehension? Based on research, communication is critical to success in all types of environments. Here we speak mainly about intellectual environments. No matter what you do nowadays in the modern world, it is very critical that you are low apprehensive, because high apprehensive individuals are seen as less attractive socially, less friendly, less responsive, less assertive. They talk less, they date fewer people, they have fewer friends, and they are very unlikely to have managerial positions or high status jobs, because all these jobs require good communication skills and very low apprehension. Here I especially want to point out to the concept assertive and remind you that this is one of the most important characteristics of teachers and good communicators, because being assertive means that you are able to make other people do what you want, but it is still not seen as arrogancy. You still manage to do it in a nice way. Once communication apprehension is developed, and the next slide is about how communication apprehension develops, it is important how we can treat it or modify the apprehension. Here we have listed 3 types of treatments: systematic desensitization, cognitive restructuring, and the third one, changing the context. It is important to note that the first 2 are actually done by professionals, usually psychologists, in clinics or at schools. Systematic desensitizations mean that the therapist tries to make the person, the individual which is highly apprehensive, link the thoughts of communication with something pleasant. And the moment he thinks about communication and the fear of communication, it's a kind of hypnosis. He or she automatically thinks about something more pleasant, and then the fear is lowered. As I said, this is usually done by specialists, therapists, psychologists, psychoanalysts. The second kind of treatment, cognitive restructuring, is very similar to the first one, but this is more dealing with making the individual believe that his or her performance is positive. Usually highly apprehensive people have very low appreciation of themselves, and then automatically in advance it creates some kind of frustration with them. But if the therapist manages to replace those beliefs about the performance with something more positive, then the fear will be reduced. And finally, what we as teachers could do related to changing the context, which is important in educational settings, means that we can make sure that highly apprehensive individuals are taken good care in our classroom. What do we mean by this? Usually teachers tend to place children who are less talkative and more shy. They place them either in front of the teacher or in the middle, and they keep pointing to them in order to make them feel more free. But this is actually wrong. We should be just aware that it is beyond their control, and that they really face a very big problem trying to overcome the fear or the frustration when they communicate. And maybe we can create situations in which they are encouraged to communicate. Sometimes at first, maybe just in front of the teacher himself or herself, and then in smaller groups with their friends to whom they feel close, although these things are not very feasible in our schools, where we deal with a lot of pupils, and limitation of space, limitation of resources, and then the pressure to cover the material which is required by the ministry. It is also worth to mention how communication apprehension develops, and this might be very useful for us as teachers, as parents, as educators, as pedagogists. Number one factor is genetic predisposition. So some people are born as highly communicative apprehension. Then the second factor is the reinforcement related to the theory of behaviorism, which means that maybe as children people were not adequately motivated, awarded when they tried to communicate. Then another factor is also the failure to develop communication skills, or here by failure we means later development of communication skills. And in this way a kind of a vicious circle is created, because you will recall in schools children who are shy, who have developed communication skills later, are not very well accepted by their peers, and then it influences badly. So they are not encouraged to develop, and it creates a kind of vicious circle. And the last one factor, but not the least, is having an inadequate communication models. Maybe the children, when they grew up, did not have a good communication model, from which here we refer to parents, grandparents, friends, relatives. And it is important for children to see a model, and they then follow that model and build the same skills in themselves. If the model does not exist, then we can't expect that the skill is developed, because there is no example how it should be developed. This is basically everything about communication apprehension, and we gave it special attention in this course because, especially at university settings, and I believe in all educational settings, when we speak about language learning, communication is critical to success, especially oral communication. Because knowing the language means being able to communicate in that language.